Impressions from the Grapes of Wrath. I'm still not done with the novel, so I still have some, maybe 10% of the book to read. I want to do one of my impressions of the book. The book is a pivotal book. I think it's one of those books, the book of the 20th century of America, the same way Moby Dick was the book of the 19th century of America, because it sets the stage for what's to come. And it sets the stage for the zeitgeist and the social developments, the economic developments. I think the great skill of Steinbeck is that he's a realist writer, and for that he has to be not just good at human the human condition, but he has to understand things like economics, politics, and he's incredibly good at that. So I think that's why this is one of those books that sets the stage for the whole century. And what I mean with that is two things. In particular, the struggle between capitalism and what's to ensue, which is a much more social form of capitalism, something we're dealing with today with the left-wing movement and the right-wing movement and all these things. But they all have their roots in this fight between capital and work. And the second is the migration, the big migration. In the Grapes of Wrath, it's the migration from particular states like Oklahoma to California, but it's a much more general and metaphoric migration that we're talking about here. The search for better, the search for a better future for your kids, the fight between what is tradition and what's the future and what's better for you, and how American society is willing to unroot itself for the better. Those are the two things that impress me the most. Again, this is not a formal review of The Grapes of Wrath. It will follow after I read the book. Given how important I find this book, given how impressed I am with the book, and again, because it's a seminal book of the 20th century, I want to do special episodes, and this is one of them. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's April 20th, 2022. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 3%. The market is flat. For the year, we are now down 14.9%. The market is down 6.2%. We're underperforming by 8.7%. I think let's just talk quickly about the market. Netflix had their earnings call yesterday. The stock is down 36% after the call. In a nutshell, Netflix has announced that it is not a growth company anymore. Actually, it's stagnating, and Netflix is now not even growing anymore in terms of subs. It is hopefully going to still grow in terms of revenue. There's revenue potential and things like that, but it is not growing in terms of subs. And this is a shock to the market. Netflix is turning from a growth stock to a not growth stock. The valuation is adjusting to media valuations. And these are the kinds of things that everybody is so afraid of in the growth stock, in the growth investor community. It's when a growth stock goes from growth to non-growth. This is also what, for example, people are afraid of with Tesla. They say, well, it could happen that one day Tesla is not a growth company anymore. And that's the short case for any kind of growth stocks. The peak of Netflix was $700, I think less than a year ago. And now it's $220. That is a correction of almost 70%, or actually a little bit more than 70%. So that's what happens. I mean, this is just a fact. Again, we spoke about probabilities yesterday. This is what is. This is what is. And there's no such thing as a probability that Netflix is maybe $1,000 stock or a $200 stock, and then you do some sort of weighted average. This is what is. This is the reality that investors have to deal with. We have other stocks also being sold off, like Disney and Roku and all these sort of media stocks. And then, of course, we have a bit of a repercussion on the tech side of things. So Tesla's down 3%, and Nvidia's down 3%, and so on and so forth. Now, my thoughts about this is, look, there's a risk. What is right now, in terms of Tesla, is that the company is growing at least 50% annually in volume, that because of certain situations in the market that we spoke about a lot, the high demand for EVs, the high oil price, and things like that, the company is facing even a lot more demand than normal. So we expect pricing power and therefore higher sales growth than 50%. and much higher earnings growth because of margin expansion. We are aware of the fact that this is not permanent, so we shouldn't be pricing the stock according to that growth. In other words, if they grow earnings by 100%, then that is not the kind of growth we should be pricing in for the near future, but 50% is a decent growth. We think that this number is not at risk because Tesla is by far the leader in the marketplace. And more importantly, Tesla is doing the right things in order to stay the leader, which is in particular build the machine that builds the machine. Therefore, we believe that competing with Tesla will become actually increasingly more difficult. Now, let's look at what happened to Netflix. Netflix grew an infrastructure that also became incredibly difficult to penetrate because it was a streaming infrastructure and a media infrastructure. In other words, there were movies and shows you could watch on Netflix that you couldn't watch anywhere else. The competition has caught up with that, and I think the main problem with Netflix is that the infrastructure to build both of these assets was not a Netflix owned infrastructure. In other words, not an IP, not a special infrastructure that they particularly controlled. Making movies and shows, that's not exactly something Netflix controls. That's up to artists and writers and directors. The streaming infrastructure, of course, Netflix doesn't own. What was an advantage in the beginning, meaning you could piggyback on the streaming infrastructure and so on and so forth, now is becoming a disadvantage because everybody else can also piggyback on the internet and broadband and all that stuff. There's a clear difference with Amazon. Amazon took advantage of the internet but built a physical infrastructure in terms of warehouses and logistics and all that stuff to still be at least somewhat a leader in the sort of delivery space, although we believe that the value of Amazon is not in the online delivery, it is in AWS, and that's a whole different story. So come back to Netflix. I think what Netflix should have done is try to become a lot more unique, try to become an AI company in terms of predicting what people want to see and also predicting what to make in the future. This was the hope. This was sort of why we thought we should invest in Netflix years ago, and we never did because they never did. They never decided to become an AI company, a pure AI company, in a sense that why not invest a lot more into what people want to see and include the whole library. So become sort of a vertical like Google for moving pictures entertainment, and include everything. So recommend me movies and shows that you don't have on the library, so I can keep using your service and then monetize that in one way or the other, and also help me as a customer really discover interesting stuff. If I like a certain, let's say, Italian movie on Netflix, don't just recommend me all the Italian movies you have on the Netflix library, because it's not the fact that the movie is Italian. Maybe what I liked is the actor or maybe the writing, and be a lot more subtle in your AI when you recommend these things. And they never did that. The recommendation engine on Netflix, in my view, is very, very rudimentary at best. It's still better than the rest, but it's not exceptional. Like Google is exceptional relative to anything else when it comes to search. So this was the first mistake. I think the second mistake they did is they kept talking. When we spoke to them maybe 10 years ago or so, we thought, look, do you guys have any way to produce shows and movies that have a higher rate of success in terms of understanding what people want and then make those movies? They never said that. They said, no, but what we're good at is marketing our movies. In other words, we can, make a show like Narcos, and then we know that maybe the marketing budget should be higher in southern Italy because they like the mafia, and maybe not so high in northern Italy. That kind of thing. It sounds like just a better version of Coca-Cola or General Mills, if you ask me. So anyway, again, not very impressive. In terms of AI and the application of AI, given that the CEO is an AI person, has a PhD in actually artificial intelligence, albeit from the 80s or 90s, I think it was 80s. So certainly not the kind of AI we talk about today, but still, you would have expected a bit more tech. I guess what happened to Netflix, it became a media company, and now it has a media valuation. So back to Tesla and our portfolio, we hope, the positioning of Orange Capital Partners is to be invested in fundamental new concepts and engineering practices, and those concepts and engineering practices particularly manifesting themselves in Tesla and also in the CRISPR space. they are still absolutely relevant. They're new, they're fresh, and competition is not just not catching up. In fact, competition is the gap to whatever competition you wanna name here. It is widening, and it's because the infrastructure, the physical and the IP infrastructure, is compounding. The innovation stack is growing, and the compound interest, which is a function of iterations, is growing, and the compound interest in terms of knowledge and advantage is growing, and all these things are adding to the delta, which is giving us enough comfort that we will see higher stock prices in Tesla and our CRISPR stocks. At least when it comes to the question, is competition going to catch up? We can't control, let's say, macro variables and things, but as far as competition and the market dynamics are concerned, we're very comfortable with those situations. We have very high conviction. Now let's get to the impressions. So impressions from Grapes of Wrath. We believe that this book is a seminal book of the 20th century. John Steinbeck wrote it in the 30s. It is about the Dust Bowl and the people from Oklahoma coming to California, and it's about the Joad family, and the whole story is written from the perspective of the Joad family, and then also from the sort of third-person perspective. So from the bird's eye perspective, he sometimes has chapters where he just explains, let's say, how people buy cars in the 1930s, how people pick cotton, how people get paid, and things like that. And like I said in the prelude, it is a seminal book for two reasons. And the main reason is it shows the social and economic changes that are coming to the United States. The hardcore, you eat what you catch capitalism is being replaced by a more government-centric social type of capitalism. And this is important in many ways. Of course, in one way, if you read the story, you definitely root for these people. These people are good people. They're decent people. They are portrayed as absolutely the kinds of people that sort of express what the early part of the United States history was, which is people with character, people with integrity, people that stand up for things even above the law, which is one of the things that, of course, even today is still deeply rooted in the psyche of the United States, of the American human condition, that the law, even though this is, of course, the country of law, more than anything else, it is also the country of character and integrity. And you stand up even above the law. For example, if there's a scene in the book where a certain bad thing happens, and another person, let's say, kills a person as a kind of a revenge act, and you just feel as a reader that that's okay. That is okay. It is okay to kill somebody for revenge. Now, that's illegal, and I'm not propagating that by no means. But as far as the novel is concerned, in the fictional state of the novel, it feels right. It's also something, of course, Hollywood has used many times in its narrative, that you have the hero which goes above the law to fight for justice. So this is, of course, this is happening here. But let's get back to the more general first impression I have, which is, again, this zeitgeist change going from brutal capitalism to a more social capitalism. What do I mean with brutal capitalism? So we have in several chapters, Steinbeck explains in a very simple way the economic conditions of the United States, and it's about small farmers that slowly get crept up in debt and then lose their land to the large corporations. So this is the industrialization of farming, the industrialization of small crop farming into large combines, large company-owned. It's the company, it's the banks, they control the land and they control the farmers. And then one bad crop puts the farmers basically in so much debt that they become serfs and slaves. And this is, in my view, it's a very subtle point, because on the one hand, you have this industrialization of farming, more efficiency, tractors, machines, things like that are coming. But on the other hand, you have an enslavement of the population. Now, having said that, of course, you also have within the Joad family, for example, there's one of the brothers who wants to be a mechanic. He's good with cars. And to me, he's the hope, because you see that if you educate yourself, if you actually do something useful with your life in this new economy, you can also gain wealth and become a more important person. So, or a more successful person. In other words, the Joad family is also a symbol for stagnation. All this talk about character and who is the boss in the family, and the man is the boss in the family, and the woman is the whatever, all these conversations, they're fine, but in the end, if you don't educate yourself, if you don't progress with your creativity, you will be stuck and capitalism will take you over. So this is actually, The Grapes of Wrath probably has never been portrayed like that, but if I look at it, it is also a book that you want to read to understand how important education is. Because if you don't educate yourself, you end up like the Joad family. You end up in a commoditized industry as a commoditized piece of labor. And a commoditized piece of labor means that your wages will come down relative to the cost of living and you will be poor. And this is exactly what happened in the United States over the last 100 years. If you didn't go with the progress as a person, you end up commoditized. You end up standing in line to be a cotton picker or a peach picker, and the wages will come down relative to the cost of living, and that makes you poor. So that's definitely one thing that comes across in this book. Another thing that comes across in this book is that the government starts interfering. There's another chapter where Steinbeck talks about how the people in the West and the owners in the West are scared of the government. We're talking here about the New Deal and Roosevelt's New Deal to deal with the Great Depression. And what Roosevelt did in those years was, let's say, set up government camps for people that are displaced, for migrant workers, things like that. But it was the first time that the government started interfering. There's many lines in the book where the people, the owners, the people in California, let's say the locals, they hate those government camps, not necessarily because they hate a government camp or something, but they hate the fact that the government is interfering and changing the human condition to the better for the poor, and sort of, if you want, they're changing the relative terms of trade between the poor and the owners. And that's something, of course, that keeps coming in the United States in the 60s under Johnson. Even today under Biden, we have this attempt to spend trillions of dollars on the poor. So there's always these waves of the government has to rectify the displacement of people, because this is really what's happening. There's a line in the book that says Lenin and Marx and people like that, they're results, they're not the cause. The cause is the displacement of people. And it goes back to, I think the reason people are displaced is because they can't catch up with technology, because education doesn't catch up with the technological change, and then people get displaced. And this is fundamentally what the problem is in the economy. Anybody who's looking for a job is in general only looking for a job because their education doesn't match the needs in the job market. And the only way to get accepted in the job market to the job that reflects your expectations is to make sure that your skill level reflects your expectations. So the second thing that I want to talk about today is the displacement of people in a sense of the migration. This is a positive thing. I think no matter how depressed the Joad family is, I always see hope because of the ability to move. Like, we can always pack our things and go to another place. And this is something that I find fascinating as a European living in the United States. Even now, even us as a family, we're always ready to move if things don't pan out the way we want. This is not as prevalent in Europe, for example. Europe is not like that. And I personally appreciate that about the United States. And I think it's, even though, again, The Grapes of Wrath, I mean, the name of the book is already depressing in a sense that it's scary, and it alludes sort of trouble and bad things and all that. There's this hope, and the hope comes from the migration. And I think as a conclusion, I want to say that even now, almost 100 years after the book, a lot of the basic things are still in place. We have the displacement of people, which is driven by the lack of education relative to the speed of technological innovation. So the conclusion here is that you have to keep up with the technological shift through educating yourself. and that you have to keep your character, because no matter what, you are, as a person, defined by the character of your person, not the law. And I think third, there's always hope. You can always pack your stuff and go somewhere else and start new. That is not just something that is written down in books. This is a real option you have. And optionality gives you freedom. The measure of freedom is wealth. And wealth is defined by your ability to channel resources into something productive. And that is driven by your creativity and by your courage. Thank you.